David Lee Powell was once the valedictorian of his high school, a star student at the University of Texas, poised for a brilliant future. But then drugs and a misguided split-second decision turned him into a cold-blooded killer, taking the life of a courageous police officer. For 32 years, he lived on the fragile line between life and death, becoming the longest-serving death row inmate in Texas at the time. What pushed David Lee Powell down a path of no return? Let's delve into the last meal he chose, the final words he spoke before his life ended, and uncover the story behind this case. This tragic story revolves around Officer Ralph Ablanedo, a selfless hero of the Austin Police Department. At 26, Ablanedo was a passionate young officer, a beloved son, and a respected member of the community. He had dedicated his life to service, protecting the peace for the people of Austin, and vowing to uphold law and order. He was simply doing his job on May 18, 1978, when he stopped a car for a license plate violation, a routine stop with no sign of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Ablanedo approached the vehicle with the utmost professionalism, following every protocol to ensure safety. He could not have known that his dedication would be met with unimaginable brutality, forever stealing his future and robbing the city of a hero. On the other side of the law was the perpetrator, David Lee Powell, born January 13, 1951. Far from the typical image of a criminal, Powell had an incredibly promising start. He graduated high school a year early, as both valedictorian and the student voted most likely to succeed in his class. With his outstanding academic record, Powell was accepted into the honors program at the University of Texas, majoring in chemistry. His intellect was considered exceptional, opening the door to a bright future. However, Powell's life took a tragic turn during his university years. He became involved in anti-war movements and in the process fell into drug use, particularly methamphetamine. This powerful drug devastated his mind, eroded his will, and pushed him into a severe mental decline, preventing him from completing his studies. By 1978, at the age of 27, David Lee Powell was deeply entrenched in the dark world of addiction, not only using but also dealing methamphetamine. The intelligence that was once his greatest asset was now being destroyed by those very chemicals. According to criminal psychologists, the psychological changes under the influence of methamphetamine can lead to aggressive and uncontrolled behavior, especially when cornered. Could his potential-filled past and his fall due to drugs be the key to understanding Powell's horrific actions? On the fateful afternoon of May 18, 1978, in Travis County, Texas, fate brought Officer Ablanedo and David Lee Powell face to face. Officer Ablanedo stopped a car driven by 27-year-old Sheila Meinert because it was missing its rear license plate. Meinert was cooperative, providing her passport when asked for her driver's license. Ablanedo radioed dispatch to check the information for both Meinert and her passenger David Lee Powell. Initial reports indicated a computer system malfunction, but the dispatcher then reported back that Powell might have an outstanding warrant for misdemeanor theft. This would become the most critical detail in the entire case as it triggered Powell's brutal actions. Ablanedo, following proper procedure, requested backup from his colleague Officer Bruce Mills and stopped the car a second time for further investigation. This was the moment that Ablanedo's career and life fatally intersected with a desperate criminal. As Officer Ablanedo approached the car and Meinert was walking towards him, a horrific scene unfolded. From inside the vehicle, David Lee Powell suddenly opened fire on Officer Ablanedo through the rear window with an AK-47 assault rifle. In that moment, from Ablanedo's perspective, it must have been one of utter shock and disbelief. He tried to get up and seek cover, but Powell, in a cold and ruthless act, switched the weapon to fully automatic mode and continued to spray him with dozens of bullets. The deafening gunshots tore through the afternoon, peace turning an ordinary street into the scene of a massacre. The car then sped away, leaving Officer Ablanedo bleeding on the road. When Officer Mills arrived minutes later, he witnessed the heartbreaking scene: Officer Ablanedo with 10 bullet wounds. Although he was wearing a ballistic vest, it was not designed to withstand the firepower of an automatic weapon like an AK-47. Powell's act was not just murder. It was an act of brutal thuggery showing absolute contempt for human life, and the law, all to avoid a minor warrant. What drove David Lee Powell to act so brutally over a misdemeanor theft charge? Immediately after the murder, the Austin police force launched a large-scale manhunt. With information from Ablanedo's radio and later testimony from Sheila Meinert, police quickly identified the suspect. Although specific details of the pursuit were not widely publicized, the crucial fact is that David Lee Powell was arrested on the same day the murder occurred. This was a testament to the rapid and effective response of law enforcement agencies in Texas, preventing an armed killer from posing a further threat to the community. The immediate arrest also showed the police department's determination to bring justice for Officer Ablanedo. The subsequent investigation focused on collecting forensic evidence, witness testimony, and related details to build a strong case. From the recovered bullet fragments to fingerprints and Sheila Meinert's testimony, every detail was a critical piece in convicting Powell. But did he think he could ever escape justice after such a brutal and reckless act? The legal process for David Lee Powell was a journey that spanned nearly 3 decades. In 1978, Powell was convicted and sentenced to death. However, this sentence was later overturned due to legal errors. According to legal experts, this often happens when there are procedural mistakes during a trial, such as a violation of the defendant's rights or improperly collected evidence. The decision to overturn the sentence opened the door to a persistent series of appeals that lasted nearly 32 years, making Powell the longest-serving death row inmate in Texas at the time of his execution. Throughout that time, Powell's lawyers relentlessly sought every legal loophole and argument to reduce his sentence or obtain a pardon, while prosecutors remained steadfast in their pursuit of the ultimate penalty for the heinous crime he had committed. Each appeal forced Officer Ablanedo's family to relive their pain and wait for justice. The trial and appeals process was not just a legal battle, but also a war of wills, patience, and faith in justice. Finally, on June 15, 2010, nearly 32 years after the murder, the death sentence for David Lee Powell was carried out by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. This marked the end of one of the longest and most contentious cases in the state's history. David Lee Powell's final moments were one of the most watched aspects of this case. Powell's last 24 hours began on June 14, 2010. He was allowed final visits with his family and lawyer. According to observations by guards and the chaplain, Powell's demeanor was described as calm and seemingly accepting of his fate. He spent his time writing letters and saying his goodbyes. The final preparations included meeting with the warden and reviewing the execution procedures. Psychologists suggest that this state of calm could be a sign of accepting his fate after nearly 3 decades of legal battles. For his last meal, David Lee Powell requested a rather simple but personally significant meal. It consisted of 3 double cheeseburgers with all the trimmings, 2 bags of Doritos, and 2 strawberry milkshakes. The meal was served around 4:00 p.m., a few hours before the execution in a special holding cell. Psychological analysts often suggest that a last meal choice can reflect a desire for comfort, childhood memories, or simply a person's favorite food. For Powell, choosing these common, iconic American foods could have been an attempt to find a bit of normalcy, a memory of life before he descended into a path of crime. Compared to the bizarre or elaborate last meals of other death row inmates, Powell's choice showed a simplicity and familiarity. Does this reveal anything about the killer's state of mind in his final hours? When he was brought into the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit, David Lee Powell was given time to make a final statement. In the presence of witnesses, including the family of his victim, Ralph Ablanedo, media representatives, and prison officials, the moment was incredibly tense. David Lee Powell's last words were an apology. He said, "I hope my death can bring you some closure. I am sorry for all the pain I have caused. I am truly sorry." His tone was described as soft but clear, expressing a belated remorse. These words, though they came nearly 32 years later, elicited mixed reactions. For the victim's family, it may have been a part of closure, but the pain and loss would never fade. Criminal language analysts often study these final statements for signs of sincerity, denial, or even manipulation. For Powell, the apology seemed to be an attempt to atone for his mistake, but was it enough to soothe what had been lost? The execution process was conducted with solemnity and according to procedure. The lethal drugs were administered intravenously to Powell. His time of death was recorded at 6:13 p.m. local time. Immediately after Powell was pronounced dead, the reaction from the Ablanedo family was one of relief, a sense of closure after decades of waiting. For them, justice had been served. With the death of David Lee Powell, this tragic chapter was finally closed. The case of David Lee Powell is a painful reminder of the fragility of life and the terrible consequences that follow when a talented individual loses his way. It raises profound questions about personal responsibility, the impact of drugs, and the complexities of the justice system. The pain of Officer Ralph Ablanedo's family is a testament to the ultimate sacrifice and irreparable loss suffered by those in public service. The case also sparked long-standing debates about the death penalty, its humanity, and whether holding someone on death row for nearly 32 years constitutes a just punishment. This case also prompted changes in police policy and procedure, emphasizing the importance of more detailed information checks and better equipment for officers. Although the case is closed with Powell's death, the questions about the root causes of criminal behavior and the need for support for those struggling with drug addiction remain. What must we do to prevent similar tragedies in the future? The story of David Lee Powell is a costly lesson on the price of violence and the importance of the choices we make in life.